What is going on, Colts Nation? Welcome back to another episode of Bring the Juice. Cody and Derek here with you guys, bringing you another episode here. And guys, what we wanted to do before the NFL draft's still a couple weeks out, but the Colts have had some moves that they've made. They've made about 10 moves in total so far through free agency, re-signing their guys, making some trades, making some free agent signings. We thought that we would rank those 10 moves the Colts have made so far. And again, this is before the NFL draft is happening, so there's going to be some more moves here in the near future, but we wanted to do one pre-draft. So Derek and I made two separate lists here, and I can tell you right now we disagreed on some points, and we're going to get into those. It's going to be exciting. You guys are going to have to tell us which moves you agree with, the ranking-wise, whose list you like better. Choose mine. We'll go into this at number 10. We'll start with 10. We'll work our way all the way up to 1. So, Derek, I'll let you start first, man. Which move out of these 10 not is one you maybe dislike, but is your least favorite so far this offseason?
I just think it's the Doolin tender for me. I mean, obviously, I rank it so low because of the fact that nothing's been done yet. Obviously, the Colts with the tender, they're allowed to match any offer that a team gets to Ashton Doolin. Obviously, that may come back to help them later on. Maybe Doolin will get a decent offer from a team, and the Colts just won't pay him that. So this is a move that's like, okay, the Colts at least have a chance to make a move, but there's still no prominent chance that he actually does come back. So, it's the one move that like there's just no clear end in sight at the moment. So that's why it's so low for me.
All right, fair enough. I would say for me, number 10, and this is probably going to already start to get controversial, is the signing of Brandon Facyson because, let's be honest, Derek, this guy really hasn't played much. He hasn't started much in the NFL. Now, he may turn out to be a starter, and he may turn out to be a really good player. We don't know, but, I've just kind of looking at his, stats overall and just his starting experience. It's really nothing to get me super excited about. And I do think the Colts still need to go address. I think in my opinion, I think he's a nice number 4 corner. I don't view him as a number 2 or a number 3, in my opinion. So I think the signing, certainly with getting rid of Rocky Sin in the trade that you had, which we'll talk about, I'm sure, here soon, it makes that signing more important. But just as a player, I was just kind of like, I would have rather gone for a guy like Casey Hayward, if I'm being completely honest, as opposed to a guy like Brandon Facyson. But, Facyson is younger, and he is relatively cheap. So, I don't know. This signing to me was just kind of meh,
Mm-hmm. I gotcha.
All right, let's move on now to number 9.
All right, 9 for me is the Tyquan Lewis re-signing. The only reason I have it is so low is because, again, Lewis has struggled with injuries throughout his career. I'm not saying that I don't think he can still be a good player. I just think that when it came to, all the defensive linemen you could have potentially re-signed and still may potentially look to re-sign, you still have other options out there. But, I thought Lewis being re-signed, I thought it was a good move. I definitely thought we should have brought him back because the potential for him is still there. But that's number 9 for me.
All right, so number 9 for me was the re-signing of Zaire Franklin, and I'll tell you why. He's a good player, special teams captain, but I don't know. It was just because kind of for the price, I didn't really like how much you gave him necessarily. I get it. Special teams matters. We've said that all along, but I don't know. I just was kind of like, it's fine to bring him back, but I didn't really, that wasn't a move compared to some of these other moves that I was like, he's really going to make a major impact, when it comes to being on the football field, right? He's the captain, obviously, and everything like that. But I don't know. I just was kind of like, it's fine, but I guess I didn't potentially like paying that linebacker that much to play special teams, if that makes sense, and be a spot starter. So I think that's probably why I was kind of like, it's fine. I wasn't like in love with it. It wasn't a home run re-signing or anything like that. I was certainly happy they brought him back, but I was just kind of like, whatever, compared to, and again, hear me out, people. I'm not saying that this is a bad re-signing or anything like that. I just think compared to some of the other players and the impact I feel like they're going to have on this team, I just felt like Zaire Franklin was kind of like, whatever, you know?
Gotcha. Number 8 here for this one, and that's Zaire Franklin for me here. I know I get the whole point of, paying him $4 million a year for that was still, it might seem like a lot. But I think that we got lucky with, our linebackers staying healthy last year, even though they were hurt a lot of last year. And Zaire really only had to play one game specifically on defense. And, he showed that not only was he able to, play in that, but he was also able to thrive with EJ Speed and Bobby Okereke as well. So, he showed his value on defense. And then, like I said, with all these defense, with all the special teams guys that you've been losing, right? You lost Matthew Adams this last week. You lost George Odom the week prior. There's no clear direction on if you're going to have Ashton Doolin. I think Franklin just kind of goes up a few above some of these guys because Franklin is your special teams captain to go along with a defensive contributor potentially. And I think that with everybody you're losing, especially on the special teams unit, I think it is that important to keep Franklin around.
But are you okay with that price? I think it was 3 years for $18 million. So that's what, $6 million per year for a guy like him?
I did not think it was that high. I thought it was 12 million, but either way, like I said, we got lucky with the linebackers for the Colts actually, staying primarily healthy all year long. And, unfortunately, we only had to worry about Darius Leonard missing 1 week due to COVID and, all of those things. So, I mean, again, as a guy that's going to be your main special teams contributor now, one of them, and then on top of it, is probably going to play a little bit more of a role in the defense that you have going for you at some point. I think that it wasn't a bad, I don't think it was a bad thing that they had that price. Is it a little too much? Maybe. But again, to secure one of your primary captains, I think that's important.
All right. To clarify, you were right. I don't know what I was thinking.
All good. I was hoping I was right. I was like, wait a minute, hold on a second.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe I was thinking of some other contract.
I think you're thinking of Alie-Cox's contract or something close to it.
That's probably right. Yeah. It's hard to keep all these contracts straight sometimes.
Yeah, I know. So. We sometimes have forgotten what the contracts are because it's just like, man, it seems so bland at the time being.
Yeah. But, that's not too bad, I guess. Maybe I take back a little bit of my comments because it's $4 million for a guy that special teams captain and, he can play some spot duty at Sam linebacker too. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I would agree with you there. Maybe I don't dislike the move as much as I initially thought because I thought the price was different. But all right, let's move on to. Oh, I didn't even.
Yeah,
get
you
mine.
Get your right. Number 8. What's your number 8?
So my number 8 is actually the re-signing of Tyquan Lewis. I flip-flopped with you here, and I think the reason I did that is because I get the injury. Like, that is a serious injury for Tyquan Lewis. But I would argue, Derek, when he was healthy last year, he was the best defensive end the Colts had.
Yeah.
I mean, I would argue that, and I think I could make a legitimate argument. I mean, Chris Ballard has talked up Tyquan Lewis. Now, I don't think he's going to necessarily be a starter. I mean, maybe he is technically a starter, and then, like Yannick Ngakoue comes in on third downs or something like that. But I think he's a key part of what this defense wants to do. And the big question is, can he come back from that injury and perform at that level that he was at last year? I mean, he was tearing it up, man. He was having games where he was just absolutely on fire. And so if he can continue to grow and ascend and come back from this injury, I really feel like he's the guy that could earn a bigger extension with the Colts team this next offseason, because I think he's so valuable to what they want to do. Now, I get it. You could maybe label him a bust, but I think out of all the second-round picks that you've invested at defensive end, he's been your best player that you've gotten, your return for your draft capital there. He's always been a solid player, and I think he's starting to turn into a really good player for this team. So if you can have a solid rotation of 3-4 guys at defensive end, throwing in Quiddy and also Dio, I mean, that is a recipe for success on this team. We all know how much the Colts want to rotate defensive linemen in, keep them fresh, things like that. And I think also with, the addition of Gus Bradley and Nate Ollie, the new defensive line coach, I think this could potentially be, if he can come back and be fully healthy and play at the level, I think he could even step it up to another level, honestly, because we saw what, Gus Bradley and his scheme did for guys like Max Crosby and other defensive linemen, who really stepped up their game and took it to another level. And so I'm really excited. I think nobody's really talking about it, but I think that Gus Bradley effect could have a really positive effect on a guy like Tyquan Lewis, who was already starting to come into his own a little bit, and now I think can continue to ascend. I think that's why I put him over Zaire Franklin, just because I felt like he was one of the best players when he was healthy last year on this defense. And I feel like if he can, now with a new defensive coordinator, he could even step it up, and this could be a quality re-signing, like better than we're even thinking right now. I really truly believe that, but it all will hinge again on if he can stay healthy. Right. So he, for me, is my number 8. Let's move on to number 7 here, Derek. What do you have here?
I have the Alie-Cox extension. So the only reason I had this high is due to the fact that what they actually did pay for him. When you look at some of the other tight ends that were re-signed throughout this whole free agency period so far, we talked a lot about the tight end free agent groups, and some of the guys that we even wanted on this team signed for a lot less money than what the Colts gave Alie-Cox, right? So you try to think, okay, with the retirement of Jack Doyle, right? You were kind of put in a desperate spot where you felt that you needed to re-sign one of your tight ends. You had to make sure Alie-Cox came back, because if you didn't, then all of a sudden you're going to have to restructure your draft plan. You have to restructure your free agency plan all around that position. So the Colts put themselves in a bad situation with that. And of course, I think they paid just a tad bit too much for Alie-Cox. That's why I have this move so low. But then again, I think with the signing of Matt Ryan, I think that this could potentially turn into, I'm not saying it's a bad move. I think that Alie-Cox this year could really benefit from a guy like Matt Ryan, who knows when to get him the football in the red zone, could potentially, have those throws that Wentz sometimes missed. I refer back to 2020 with Phillip Rivers and Alie-Cox. They had a pretty decent relationship with each other in the red zone, even though I felt like that was still severely underutilized. I felt like this one with Matt Ryan will really help Mo to utilize his game a lot more. Again, I still question the potential of Alie-Cox. I think it could be higher, but at the end of the day, that's where I'm at.
My question with Mo is, like, has he reached his peak?
Right.
We don't know. I would have said last year, after this last season, I would have said, yeah, he reached his peak, because it just seems like he shows flashes. But okay, again, how much do you put on Mo? How much do you put on the quarterback situation? I mean, really, with everybody. I mean, but you can throw in the argument, Michael Pittman, for example, he ascended even with the question marks at quarterback. So, yeah, it will be interesting for sure. But I think for me, I'm going to actually go, and I'm going to talk now about Ashton Doolin. And I think the reason is, what have you done at wide receiver at this point, Derek? What in the world have you done to address this? I think you're going to get a couple guys in this draft for sure. There still are guys out there like, bringing back T.Y. Hilton, or signing Julio Jones, or signing Jarvis Landry. There's still a few names out there in the wide receiver market. But I think right now, with how much Doolin helped you last year in, special teams, obviously, he led the NFL in special teams tackles. He was really good in that department, but also as a receiver, I think just giving Matt Ryan, a guy that can just burn player, can just go down and burn some guys. Ashton Doolin right now, I think, is your best option, because he showed that ability last year to do that. So I like this re-signing, because I think you're going to get him for very cheap, and I think he's a quality player that deserves, in my opinion, a lot more snaps than he got last year. And again, I'll admit, I probably am a little bit biased, because we all know, and Derek, how much I like Ashton Doolin, how much I feel like he deserves more of an opportunity.
Yeah.
So I just think for that, now you get the option with this tender to match any deal, and I really don't think there's going to be a team that's going to go pay Ashton Doolin a couple million. I really don't.
Yeah, I don't think that is true. I don't believe so. I mean, there might be a team that might consider it due to the fact that, again, the potential is there for a guy like Doolin. I mean, again, I said it last year several times towards the end of the year that, I was wrong about Ashton Doolin. I felt that, in limited snaps, especially towards the end of the season, how good he played for a struggling QB like Carson Wentz. And then you now have a guy like Matt Ryan that can utilize Doolin's skill set a little bit more and his vertical ability. I think Matt Ryan can still do that. And, especially for special teams, the guy, if you did resign him, he's going to be your number one special teams guy. I mean, he is the one now. So, I certainly hope the Colts get him back. Just again, I'm just wondering, the reason why I had that one so low is because, again, that move hasn't been official yet. So I just don't know, like, if I would want to put him higher than 7 at this point.
Sure. So I realized in this process, Derek, that we forgot to mention one player, Armani Watts, who the Colts brought in, another safety, more special teams. I mean, if you had to add him to this list, where would you? I personally would have him outside of the top 10. I'd probably have him at 11. Where would you put him, though, in this list? Because I'm sure you're not going to put him ahead of some of the other players we're going to talk about.
Yeah, I'd probably end up putting him at 10 or 11 for me personally, just due to the fact that, again, it's safety depth. And there's just there's not a ton to go off of with Armani Watts, because, fourth round pick 4 years ago, he's been a primary, role player. So that's where I would put him at.
Yeah, and again, that shows you how little we think. I mean, maybe he'll be a great special teams player, but it's like we almost forgot about Armani Watts. Like, and I want him to go out and prove us wrong. Excuse me. So, all right, let's continue here. I think now we are at number 6.
Yes.
So, what is your number 6 favorite move the Colts have made so far in free agency?
That's going to be Brandon Facyson for me. I've been sold a little bit on some of the tape that I've seen from Facyson. I know he's still a young guy and still has, some things that needs to work on. Obviously, I don't see this being more than a depth signing, but then again, the Colts really haven't made a lot of moves at cornerback at this point. So, you traded away your presumed number one corner on the outside for Yannick Ngakoue that, now you have that hole to fill. Does Facyson end up being that, number 2 outside corner? It's going to be a good question. But again, Facyson has a lot of the intangibles that you want in a corner. Is obviously familiar with Gus Bradley's defensive scheme, so that really helps. And I think you and I are both in agreement that the Colts need to do something at corner to try to improve that group even more. So obviously Fayson's not going to be the long-term solution. At least we think that's true. But again, I think Facyson deserves a little bit more credit. I think that the signing itself made sense. And I think that Facyson could be a decent role player for us going forward.
I think the reason, and maybe I can clarify, because I'm sure there's people who are like, I can't believe Cody put Brandon Facyson at number 10. I get that, but I think I kind of look at it as like, I just don't view him as a starter. If he is a starter and he plays well, all right, then I will eat my words. I will, but I just don't necessarily see him. I still feel like corner's a major need for this team, if I'm being completely honest. I don't think a Brandon Facyson type of player is going to change your defense or really help your defense that much. He's not going to be one of the, as good as your corners were last year, in my opinion. That's just my opinion. You can disagree with it. That's fine. But I think for me, Derek, number 6 for me has to be Rodney McLeod, the most recent signing from the Indianapolis Colts, because look, I mean, you lacked depth at safety last year. You really botched the safety depth last year. I still, to this day, do not understand why Andre Chacheri was not, did not stay with this team. I really do not understand that. Then you were stuck with a guy like Andrew Sendejo, 34 years old, just wasn't a great player. I mean, he was old and just no thank you. It was almost like it was an addition by subtraction when he was out of the game. When obviously it sucked when he got injured, but you know what I mean? Your safety depth was just really bad. So I think bringing in a guy like McLeod, who 31 years old, know he's a little bit older, but he's that vet presence back there. Your safeties are really young right now, Derek. I mean, you got Julian Blackmon, coming off that injury, and also you have Khari Willis, who's still very young. He was drafted only a few years ago. I kind of look at it as like it's also Julian Blackmon insurance. If he doesn't come back right away, I think all signs are pointing to him doing so. But, if he doesn't, you still have a quality starter there. And, now you finally have some depth with him and Amrani Watts back there. And you don't have to address that in the draft, in my opinion, which is just one more thing to knock off of your needs list. So, I mean, he has that torn ACL, that he suffered a few years ago, which obviously, you want to continue to monitor. But he was a captain with Philadelphia. Eagles fans were really torn up that they didn't bring him back. So, I mean, everything I've heard about Rodney McLeod, Derek, has been positive. Like Eagles fans love Rodney McLeod. So I think just from that signing alone, just from hearing from different people, I love this move. I think it's a really, really solid move. He may be, your third safety. I think he probably will be, but he can step in a pinch and you really won't lose as much as you would have last year. So he, for me, is number 6.
I got you. I agree with you. I think it's good for depth purposes and everything else.
All right, number 5 for you.
Number 5, that's going to be McLeod for me. I think that McLeod, again, an older piece, obviously, and it's just going to be mainly depth. But we saw just how thin the depth was for the Colts at safety last season, and Odom did a very fantastic job at times of stepping in. That Bills game was phenomenal. I mean, he was outside of Jonathan Taylor. I think George Odom was actually the best player for the Colts that day because, stepping in, doing what he did against Josh Allen in that offense and almost having 3 interceptions, almost had 4 actually. So, he was all over the place. He had that 1 interception. He did a fantastic job of stepping in, and there were other times when, he came in, he played well against Arizona, was obviously a special teams guy, and, it really helped. But Rodney McLeod, for me, is another one of those guys that, again, brings that championship pedigree to the locker room that the Colts are really trying to get at. I think the common trend for a lot of this, Cody, has been guys that, have been to that big stage and understand what it takes to get there, right? You're talking about some of the coaching hires they made, former players that have been there, done that, understand it. Some of these re-signed guys and some of the signings that they made, guys who have been there, done that, understand what it is. Because, I mean, I think I can confidently sit here and say, Cody, that, the locker room, this group, while it's knit tight and obviously these guys love each other, I think the locker room itself was not at the spot that the Colts originally thought it was at. I think that it was lacking some accountability and it was lacking some motivation and understanding of what needed to be done to get over hurdles. And I think that, along with a guy like Rodney McLeod and some of these other guys, they know what it means to, have it mentally, right? And Rodney McLeod, I think is a very, very serviceable safety because, last season, I think he had like over 50 tackles, had a couple of turnovers as well for the Eagles. Even though that last season, it wasn't a great defensive season for the Eagles. So I think that's why I would have him as my number 5, because I think that the championship pedigree he brings and, everything else that goes along with it, just being a really good depth signing, I think that's what matters.
Yeah, I wanted to double back on just what you had said a little bit, because those were my exact thoughts is like, this team, DeForest Buckner said it, they crapped the bed down the stretch, the last 2 games especially. And, this locker room, as much as they put an emphasis on it, it kind of failed the team. The locker room kind of did. They didn't hold guys accountable. And I think a lot of times Carson Wentz was that scapegoat, but Carson Wentz isn't allowing Hunter Renfrow to just completely kill them. He's not allowing Jacksonville to go down and Trevor Lawrence to be virtually perfect on that first drive. You need some accountability, especially on defense. And so, you get a guy like him, who won't let that happen. I think that's kind of been something we've the guys that they brought in Yannick Ngakoue, who's been a Pro Bowl player, who knows what it takes to get there. They brought in a Matt Ryan, who is a championship guy that won't let that happen. Things that happened last season, the Colts are bound and determined, Derek, to not have that happen again.
Right.
Because you think about it, if the Colts would have had, a players like this last year, sitting in the position they are with 2 games to go, I have the utmost confidence they would have made the postseason. Do you have that confidence too? Because I feel like they would have, based off of how much they brought in terms of accountability this year.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about when it comes to this group is still very, very young and still very inexperienced. And especially when you're talking about like playoff experience and what you need to get to that point, there's a lot of teams that have a lot of these young guys, but some of them have that experience that some of these Colts players just don't have. And going down the stretch, we saw the Colts break down because they didn't have leaders at certain places that needed to make sure that guys were being held accountable. And Darius Leonard tried everything he could. He's only one man. Can't always do everything by himself. You brought in these coaches that are going to teach these guys about that mentality. You brought in some of these guys that are going to be able to be in the locker room telling other guys what needs to be done. So, I think that this team as a collective mentality is going to be much better for this season.
All right. So we've done 5 of them so far. Now we'll move on to number 4. Number 4 for you, Derek, what would that be?
Number 4 for me is going to be the Matt Pryor re-signing. I think that, for as many offensive linemen as you've had losing so far this offseason, that's been a big issue for the Colts so far, is depth at every position. But right now, Matt Pryor was somebody that you just felt like you had to re-sign because, what we had no expectations for him going into this last year. Most of us had no idea who Matt Pryor was. I had to even reach out to my guy, RB, to find out, who is this guy? And, he said he's just another depth piece for you guys. But then, like I said, multiple times for a span of like 5 weeks when Braden Smith was out with his ankle injury, he was probably the best offensive lineman the Colts had for about 5 weeks during that beginning part of the season. So, it was really good to see Matt Pryor, take initiative and, go from a virtually a nobody that anybody never heard of before to, being one of the most sought out offensive linemen that the Colts had. And, it's really great that the Colts were able to get him back on a relatively cheap 1-year deal. So I'm happy with it. And, whatever their plans are for Matt Pryor, you can feel confident that whatever position they need to put him in, he is going to be there and he's going to deliver.
Yep. All right. For me, number 4 has to probably be, I would say for me, number 4 has to be Alie-Cox. I haven't talked about him yet, but, for the reasons that you kind of said, Derek, like, with the market as crazy as it was, the fact that I think one thing you didn't mention that I want to talk about, the Colts didn't have a quarterback at that point, or there was a lot of uncertainty at quarterback at that point. You had to bring them back because who's going to want outside free agents? Who wants to come to a team that doesn't know who their quarterback is? So you get Alie-Cox back at a pretty, maybe overpaid slightly, but I think he almost had to at that point. And you get him locked in for a couple of years. And now Matt Ryan has, a tight end. He has 2 tight ends on the roster under contract. So you feel a little bit better about that. On top of all the stuff that you already said about him. Number 3, I'm going to go Matt Pryor as well, and I'll let you get to yours here, but I just wanted to bounce off of your point about Matt Pryor. I mean, like, you could, I think, best case scenario, he pans out and he's your left tackle for the next number of years. Best case scenario, in my opinion, because I think he's going to get the first shot at left tackle. If he plays as well as he did at right tackle, I think certainly the Colts will feel comfortable extending him after this year for multiple years. But I think worst case scenario, okay, he's a depth piece. You move on from him maybe next year, or maybe you re-sign him again as just a depth guy. But I think for that reason, I mean, you look what you traded away, Derek, a 7th round pick to get him, and he could potentially be your left tackle. I mean, I think that's just tremendous value there from Chris Ballard and company. And I think he's still going to be relatively cheap this year. And, depending on how he plays, he could be relatively cheap down the stretch. And we'll see how he does at left tackle, but I really feel like this, I like this move just because of how well he played. And now with the questions at left tackle, I mean, we were discussing this last season. Remember that? We were discussing, should Matt Pryor, when Braden Smith came back, we were like, should Matt Pryor be getting looks at left tackle? And, Eric Fisher obviously continued to play there, kind of struggled. But now it's Matt Pryor's chance and opportunity to really seize the day and go and get paid potentially next season if he performs very well.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Who is your number 3 here?
The number 3 move that I have, and that is the Carson Wentz trade. Right. I mean, I think that, again, that was a phenomenal trade that Ballard was able to pull off. We understand that we're not getting that first round back, but again, to get the compensation that he got out of Wentz, I mean, it was a phenomenal trade when it happened because, the Commanders obviously bit a lot more on them what they should have, giving us back our third and then giving us a conditional third that could be a second next year, and then also on top of it, taking all that contract. And so we don't have to pay for any of it, help saving our cap situation a lot more than what we had. I mean, that was a phenomenal trade. It was a shocker for sure. But obviously, we've seen all the news about what Irsay's been saying about it. They said it had to be done, and, they did it. And somehow Ballard found a way to just impress me once again with how that trade went down, because I did not expect anyone to give up that kind of compensation for Carson Wentz. And the fact that Ballard was able to get that out of the Washington Commanders, I'm impressed.
All right, number 3 for me, I think I'm going to go with the Matt Ryan trade. And I love this trade. I'll say that. I love for the value of what you gave up, only a 3rd round pick this year, and you're able to get Matt Ryan. And, you got him a lot cheaper than I thought you were going to get him too, because the Falcons are eating a lot of that dead cap. But, what can you say about him? I mean, his demeanor, just his presence in the locker room. I mean, I think it's fair to say the Colts upgraded at quarterback this season, and they really didn't have to do a whole lot. It's crazy, Derek, because you mentioned the Carson Wentz trade, which for me is number 2. But the fact is, first off, the Colts should have never made that trade. I mean, I think we can all say that. It was a bad trade at this point for the Colts, all things considered, considering what Irsay has said and all that stuff. But it's amazing what the Colts were able to, number one, you mentioned it, get for Carson Wentz, a 3rd round pick, this year, swap seconds. So you get a higher 2nd round pick. So really you're only about 10 picks out of the 1st round this year. And then a conditional 3rd that could be a 2nd next year. And oh, by the way, the contract that they took all of it. They took all the contracts. So now you could go out there and you could make a few more moves in free agency and trades and stuff like that. And also what you gave up for Matt Ryan. I mean, you acquired in this Carson Wentz trade versus getting the better quarterback, and you still got more draft capital. So say what you want about, the Carson Wentz trade last year. It was a failure. We can all admit that now. But the Colts cleanup job this year has been really, really fantastic, in my opinion.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
All right. So I'm wondering, because you said your 3 is your 2 now the Matt Ryan trade, or what would your number 2 be?
My number 2 is Yannick Ngakoue. Ngakoue at number 2. I've been saying it from that defensive end was the position we had to make a move on. And, Ballard made a really good trade, just a player for player trade, gave up one of our corners for, a defensive end who's only going to be 27, still right at the edge of his prime, and has had 55 career sacks in 6 seasons. Only a couple of guys in the NFL have been as efficient at rushing the quarterback as Yannick Ngakoue over the last 6 years. I mean, you brought it up on a tweet that Yannick obviously brought up in his, was that Yannick is has the 2nd most pressures by a defensive end in the last 5 years of any defensive end in the entire NFL right now.
I'll pull it up. It's I know what it is. I don't want to butcher it here.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was super cool that Yannick first off, quote tweeted it and said something. It was just like, wow, I already like this guy already. So this is the tweet. It says, only 2 players have had 8+ sacks in every season since 2016. Yannick Ngakoue and Aaron Donald. That's it.
Yep. So again, goes to show you, like, Yannick's not going to be amongst the leaders in sacks every year. It's not going to be amongst the top guys, but you also feel confident that he is going to continue to get those sacks that are going to help down the stretch. Because again, the Colts last season, terrible at getting after the quarterback. So Yannick immediately makes this defensive line group way better, because now you're taking pressure off of DeForest Buckner a little bit more, because now there is a guy on the edge that can get to the quarterback if you do not commit to him. You think Kwity Paye, now Kwity Paye has room to grow in this second year. You could see Kwity Paye might have a 6-7 sack year. You match that with 8-9 sacks of Yannick, maybe even more. And then on top of it, that pressure you're going to get up the middle with DeForest, that's going to be huge. I love the pick. I didn't think that I didn't love the fact that we gave up Rock Yassin for it. But again, like you and I have said several times, Yannick Ngakoue is a defensive end in this moment that we had right now. It is a much more desired and much more needed position to fill than what the corner position was for us, because we still felt Kenny Moore was going to be good in the slot. We definitely think that Isaiah Rodgers can still build. You can go and get another corner to try and fill up that group. But that's why I had him in number 2. And then for my number 1, since we're already here, the Matt Ryan trade for me was the number 1 for a lot of the reasons that you brought up, is because, the presence in the locker room, giving up only a 3rd round pick for him and getting the Falcons to take a lot of that dead cap, which was huge for us for contract purposes. I think that, again, he elevates the play. And then another thing that you didn't mention was the fact that now Matt Ryan gives you the freedom now to find out what your future plans are at quarterback. I think this is the move that you can say for 2 to 3 years, you can rely on this guy to be a great quarterback for you. Maybe won't be the most elite, but he's going to move your system the way Phillip Rivers did it. Give you some good play. He's not going to lose you a lot of games. He's going to probably win you some games as well. And then on top of it, gives you a chance to be flexible with how you want to address the long-term solution at quarterback, whether that's drafting one, going and getting another one in free agency, or trade that's a blockbuster one. I don't know how it works, but that's just how I view it. And, Matt Ryan now gives you the option to expand a few more things, because before we mentioned it, nobody wanted to come to Indianapolis because the Colts didn't have a quarterback. Now, you can feel confident that you can make some moves and people will be like, oh, Matt Ryan's the quarterback of Indianapolis? Okay, cool. That's not bad. Matt Ryan's still a really good quarterback. The dude knows what he's talking about. He's a great leader. He's a great guy. He can definitely still ball. It might have felt differently if they had Wentz or if they had nobody and they had no plan. So now the possibilities of Matt Ryan, I think, just makes it that number 1 play for me, because of the fact that not only what it gives you in the present, but what it allows you to now do with future signings and draft picks and other things like that, I think opens the floodgates so much more. And I'm so happy that the Colts got Matt Ryan for a 3rd round pick.
Yeah, it was definitely a great deal for the Colts to get a guy like Matt Ryan, who you mentioned can kind of be that bridge for whoever your future is at quarterback. But I think that right there, Derek, while it's super valuable, and I agree with you on all those points, to me, number 1 has to be Yannick Ngakoue, because just look at how much you've tried to address this position and utterly failed.
Yes.
And fallen on your face year after year after year. And Yannick Ngakoue is not a placeholder, Derek.
Oh, no.
He is your present and your future at pass rush.
Mm-hmm.
2 most important things in football: quarterback play and getting to the quarterback.
Yes.
And how many years, Derek, have we said what the Colts lack is consistent pressure off the edge?
It's been at least like 3 or 4 years now. Ever since we've been doing this podcast, it is continued to be a thing that we have said time and time again.
Every offseason, at the top of the needs list is pass rush every single year.
Mm-hmm.
It's about time to do something about it. And that's something that we said pre-free agency. I said, if Chris Ballard does not make a splash signing here or whatever it is, getting a star player, he's failed this organization in that way because you have tried to address it. I mean, you've gone second round pick, three second round picks on defensive ends. Then you go get, last year you double dip in free agent or double dip in the draft. You get two guys, but they're still rookies. You can't just rely on them to take that next step.
Right.
You need a proven guy who has done it in this league that can strike fear in the heart of opposing offenses. Now the Colts getting Yannick Ngakoue. I get it. You had to pay a price, give away a corner. But like you mentioned, Derek, 10 out of 10 times I'm taking a stud pass rusher versus a stud corner. I just am. Especially with how this system is, Derek. I mean, pass rush is one of the most indispensable positions in all of football. I mean, I think we can say that. It is exponentially more difficult to find stud pass rushers, as we have unfortunately seen over the years, than it is for corners. I mean, heck, the Colts starting corners right now, you look at it, Kenny Moore, undrafted free agent. Isaiah Rodgers, 6th round pick. Brandon Facyson. You just signed him in free agency. I'm willing to bet he wasn't a first round pick.
He wasn't. I think he was I think 3rd at the earliest.
Yeah. So you know what I mean? And especially with how well Chris Ballard drafts at DB, he has found all of his starters. None of them right now in the defensive back room have been drafted before the 3rd round. None of them. Yeah. Julian Blackmon is the 3rd round pick.
Corey Willis 4th round pick. Isaiah
pick.
Rodgers 6th. Rock Ya-Sin was a 2nd, but it took him 3 years to get to the point where he was at. So
exactly. And so for that reason, I mean, I think if Ballard learned anything this offseason and last season, the last couple seasons, hopefully, it's sometimes you just aren't as good at drafting certain positions as you are others. And I think that's the best thing I think Ballard has done this offseason, because he finally understood, you know what? We've tried to address this in the draft, and we just have had mixed results. We like a few guys still, right? We brought back Tyquan Lewis, but we need an alpha in there. Oh, yeah. We need a guy that is going to help us out in the critical situations. Derek, I've tweeted this. I've said this so many times. I said, until the Colts fix their pass rush, they are going to continue to blow leads. What did they do last year? They blew leads.
Yeah, they did, right? Because they couldn't get pressure on the quarterback, and then that hurt the corners. I mean, again, the great thing about it is that for pass rush infinitely affects corner play more than corner play affects pass rush. It's the truth. You can look it up. You can look at every metric. It doesn't matter. Everyone knows if you have a more efficient pass rush, it helps your corners, because your corners are not on about maybe 5 to 10 plays a game. Your corners are not going to have to worry about the quarterback throwing the football as much, but it'd be different if you had an elite secondary. But if you had average at best pass rush, it doesn't matter. Quarterbacks and quarterback play and how offenses run nowadays are just too good nowadays for corners to consistently rely on just themselves, especially in a zone primary defense, to rely on the secondary to take over for the pass rush. It's just not how it's going to work. So it was absolutely great that Yannick Ngakoue is back in the AFC South, this time with Indianapolis. Again, I could definitely see, him having potentially 10 sacks again this season, because again, some of the guys that he has on there, I tweeted about it the other day. If Dio becomes the main 3rd down defensive tackle for us, my God, I cannot wait to see what that defensive line can do. A second-year Kwity Paye, a second-year Dio Adangbo, who's finally going to have a full offseason to do everything that he wants. DeForest Buckner back to being healthy, and Yannick Ngakoue on the other side. That gets me really excited, man.
And then you got Tyquan Lewis as well, who was your best defensive lineman. We already mentioned it, right? So, yeah, you're right, man. I mean, my goodness, it's about time we're excited for this defensive line. It is about freaking time, because we have seen miserable defensive end room.
Well, and we certainly hope
era.
that the new defensive line coach that we have signed is going to do a better job of filling the gap responsibilities for that. Obviously, we know Brian Baker was terrible. We're glad that he's gone because he obviously had some gripes against guys like Kamoko Toure. I don't even know why. But hopefully this time around, because of the pedigree of this new defensive line coach, you hope that some of these guys will be in better positions going forward. And some of these guys are going to get more playing time and they get put in the right positions at specific times. Hopefully now we'll be a little bit more fresh. And at the end of games, that pass rush finally will actually help our defense win games and finish them out.
I mean, just look at the quarterbacks you're going to have to play this year and tell me that's why my argument is this was the most important thing because you're playing against elite quarterbacks in the AFC, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in my mind, you got to get pressure. If you want to stay in those games, you got to get consistent pressure on the quarterback.
Well, and that's why Matt Ryan's my number one, because you can't, if you walk into every matchup that you play against and your quarterback is the underdog in every single matchup, which, I mean, if we're being honest, if Carson Wentz or any of our undrafted guys or drafted quarterbacks or free agent guys or whoever we would have signed came into that situation, we would have been in a bad spot from the beginning. But now with Matt Ryan, you feel confident that almost every game you walk into, whether or not Matt Ryan is the better quarterback is not the problem here. What the difference is that you feel more confident in Matt Ryan's ability to run the offensive system and to not be, and also in probably the last 5 games of the season, probably won't throw for under 150 yards every single game in the last 5 games. That's what Matt Ryan brings to this team now.
Okay, here's my rebuttal to that. Okay, Carson Wentz can have virtually a perfect game in Baltimore and they still lose because they can't stop anything.
Right.
That's my
I get
rebuttal.
that, but I'm also thinking of the terms of, Yannick, that was one game specifically. And I get that sometimes you have those outlier games, but down the stretch, we saw what was the real problem with Indianapolis, and that was the quarterback situation. And I think that's why Matt Ryan's my number one because, the defense lost us some games last year because of the inefficient pass rush. But at the end of the day, quarterback is the most important one. You got to have somebody that can take over in those games when it really matters. We didn't have that last year. This is the year we might actually have one.
All right. Well, we're going to disagree. We're going to agree to disagree because I could come up with 1,000 more arguments on why I think Yannick is more important. But I mean, not to say obviously quarterback is the most important position in sports, but also with how bad the pass rush has been, I just look at this and I'm like, boom, that is an immediate upgrade. Like I know Carson Wentz, that the Matt Ryan, Carson Wentz upgrade, but from what you had, I mean, Carson Wentz, he wasn't a terrible quarterback, right? He wasn't like great, but he wasn't terrible. Now, pass rush last year was literally bottom of the barrel when it came to win rate and all those things. And to go from that to getting a Yannick Ngakoue, to me, that margin from Wentz to Ryan, while it is decent, I think the margin from that to going from a freaking Al-Qadi Muhammad to a Yannick Ngakoue is just so much wider. That would be my argument.
I will say one last argument to that.
Okay, all right.
Carson Wentz had a 4.2 QBR rating in Jacksonville in the last game of the season. I will bet $1,000 that Matt Ryan does not have one game next year with a QB rating of under 20. I mean, that 4.2 was one of the worst QBRs that we have seen in recent memory in the NFL. Matt Ryan is not going to have a game that bad. He might have some bad games. He's not going to have a game that bad. So that's why I think the wide margin there, especially against a bad team like Jacksonville, Matt Ryan's not getting a 4.5 QBR. Okay, I'm just saying that right now.
All right. Well, then I guess you're going to blame Carson Wentz for allowing Trevor Lawrence to basically be perfect and look like the number 1 overall pick because you literally couldn't touch him.
Oh, I totally agree with you on that, but I also think that there were many times down the end of the stretch where Carson Wentz throwing interceptions. again, he could have been the first quarterback in NFL history to have 8 road games and not throw an interception. When it comes to that, again, you could have easily, with Jonathan Taylor and that group, could have went into the Raiders and could have went into Jacksonville and could have won that game. But nope, it was one of the worst performances that we had seen. So, but hopefully you guys enjoyed. Thank you guys again so much. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And as always, go Colts.